Anastasia has been active in animal rights, social justice, and environmental issues for over 10 years. Uh, and she is a former board member of the Institute for Critical Animal Studies and current advisory board member for the Food Empowerment Project, and as well as Center for Whole Communities Fellow. She's currently works locally in Asheville, North Carolina, in that area around issues of community empowerment.
Hi, everyone. So, I'm here to have a conversation about contemplating radical self-care. And the title of the talk is Contemplating Radical Self-Care, Animal Rights as If Life Matters. So I was inspired to give this talk, or at least rather just to have this conversation about what radical self-care means for us as activists and as far as building community, based on my experience as an activist and particularly my internship at a sanctuary, and how there was and how I needed a lot of support, but I didn't know how to ask for it in that space. And the culture of the sanctuary wasn't about supporting activists to help each other so that we can help animals help themselves. It was more about your feelings don't matter, and whatever you're feeling, you gotta suck it up and kind of do what you gotta do for the animals whose suffering is much greater than yours. And it's difficult to argue that and difficult to communicate that when there is no space to have that kind of conversation. So, I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I'm speaking through my phone. Okay. Okay, cool. All right. So, that's where I'm coming from. And as I met more activists who had similar experiences, not just at sanctuaries, but just in animal rights spaces, I began to feel like that was more of an issue that we needed to talk about in animal rights, like what that means to help ourselves so that we can help others. So, to get some background on what I mean by radical self-care. So radical self-care in social justice has a lineage dating back to the abolitionist movement and the anti-slavery movement of the 1800s. And there's a quote from a black woman named Mrs. Weddington that I think really captures the spirit of what radical self-care has meant in social justice. She says, we want to live, not merely exist from day to day, but to live as you or any human being desires to do. And as animal activists, we can extend that to just living beings. We want to live in dignity as living beings. And I think for us to be able to advocate that sense of dignity, that living beyond subsistence or the existence from the day-to-day, we have to be able to touch that in some way in our personal lives so that we can then extend that in our activist work in a more creative and informed way. There's also another quote by Helen Howard that's pretty famous that I love. It's around the issue of surviving and thriving. We know and see the problems because we have to live so close to them. We know that we have a sense of responsibility, and some of us, have tried to instill some of the ambitions we could not realize into our children. Am I my brother's keeper? I have to be. And that statement is really powerful for me, because not only is radical self-care just kind of, it's kind of a necessity for a higher quality of life, and it supports us as individuals, it's also an act of empowerment, which in animal rights I had to learn on my own that empowering myself to have the courage to be a witness and to be there when it matters, it doesn't come from it. It comes from taking that time and that space to care for myself and to be in a community, in a culture that encourages that. So another extension of radical self-care nowadays, it often comes in the form of spiritual practice interconnecting with social justice. And there are a lot of different organizations, communities, and social justice movements that gear towards that. A lot of different spiritual practices like meditation, contemplation, yoga, rituals based in African traditional religion or other traditions have become tools of empowerment for individuals and for communities. And I would also say that radical self-care is a theme that's emerging in intersectionality, particularly with organizations like Food Empowerment Project, within the food justice movement, and within Patrice Jones' work. And so with that, I'm gonna take it into what radical self-care can mean for animal rights and for animal rights activists more specifically. So, Patrice Jones, she wrote a book. She published a book about 4 or 5 years ago called Aftershock. And I'm not going to really get into that book. This talk is a little different from that book, but if you had not read it, I highly recommend reading it. It is a wonderful tool for activists, for animal rights activists specifically, in how we can help ourselves when faced with trauma, whether that's from witnessing images of torture and rape and dismemberment, or from being there in the moment doing rescue work, doing hard work, basically. So it's a good book for that. But there's one quote that I like to pull from that. That Patrice Jones said, "The sooner we learn to recognize and respond to signs of stress and depression in ourselves and each other, the stronger our movements will become." In other words, if you're going to be helpful to anybody, you're going to have to pay attention to your body. And so I see that as a beautiful statement of not just looking at our movement as a collective intention, but also movement at the scale of our individual lives, such as the way we move, the way we navigate and respond in our world, and the way that we treat ourselves in our world, and the spaces that we occupy. That being just as important a practice for the movement as the movement itself. So, for me, and this is just a cursory conversation here. I don't have any like specific tools on this is how you can take care of yourself, and this is what radical self-care should look like. This is more of a conversation that we don't have often enough, and I just want to spark that in the community to kind of start thinking about it, and maybe even come up with creative ways in which we can we can really like honor our whole selves and build community. So for me, I see radical self-care to the individual as being incredibly, it's being rooted in the community, meaning that we have the space and our communities are culturally sustainable enough to allow us to hold radical self-care as a principle than as a shameful obligation or something to neglect. So radical self-care being caring enough about our own lives that life matters, living as though all life matters, and how important the community is in shaping our lives and nurturing that value. And even though that's like a simple enough aspiration for radical self-care, we don't really do that. And it's hard for us as individual activists doing hard work to try to live by principles when we don't have the community to support that, and we don't have others to turn to or to have the space to just be in that. Radical self-care empowers us as individuals to help ourselves so that we can help animals help themselves. It's really difficult to be there for somebody else if we're so fatigued that we can't even work cooperatively with fellow activists on a campaign. We can't reach out to someone. We can't do vegan outreach if we're constantly bitter and worn down by all the images and all the negative feedback we see of the plight of animals across institutions. So having that space and time for radical self-care as a community empowers us bit by bit as individuals so that we can have the strength and the courage and the dignity to be there and be present and say, no, I'm gonna stand up for this today, and I have the energy to do it, and it's okay. And I know that in community we can support each other, and I trust in that. So building our community and being present for each other is a vital part of the anti-oppression movement. I mean, it's just as stressful and demoralizing as an activist to surround oneself among humans who don't seem to care about your well-being as a fellow animal. I mean, it's difficult to sustain any kind of work or to even transform lives if we're constantly being demoralized by fellow activists who don't care or who give the attitude that it's not okay to care or to support you as a fellow animal, because that's not what this animal rights culture is about. We're about helping the animals, and it's rudimentary, rigid. Yeah. It crushes the spirit to be immersed in a dysfunctional, oppressive space like that. So instead, I like to imagine an ever-dynamic and deeply connected, expanding animal liberation movement that supports activists in all stages of their activism, wherever they're coming from, meeting people where they are, and allowing them to just kind of be present, be real, and be whole while they're doing this really hard work. And not being so down on ourselves or berating others in this hard work, because this is really, really hard work. And just to be there, just to be present, and to respond genuinely to what we're perceiving in the moment, responding genuinely to that pain and witnessing the horrible things that happen to animals, it takes courage to own up to those feelings. And it crushes the spirit when we feel that and it's still like not enough. Or rather, the culture that we're in tells us that it's not enough and you're powerless to do anything and your feelings don't matter. So I also, with that, I imagine that this personal work of radical self-care is respected and valued rather than discouraged or belittled as not enough or not real activism, especially where animals are concerned. And I envision with radical self-care, activists can then have the energy and the power to stand up for animals when it really matters, because our communities, our animal rights communities are nourishing and life-affirming, where we're able to thrive in culturally and ecologically sustainable communities that show by example that this is how we can live when all life matters. So I send that aspiration for radical self-care out there in hope that this can spark a conversation and that we can learn from each other and come up with ideas with how we can better affirm life in animal rights, our own lives and the lives of others. So in my abstract, I concluded with the question, how do we navigate the storm of oppression and manage to emerge sane? And also, there's time for that. I would like for people to question what that means. What does that mean to navigate the storm of oppression? What does that mean to emerge sane? What is sanity? And I can share how I perceive it. And I would like for us to continue that conversation about it. But when I say sane, I mean healthy and whole being. Like, you bring your whole being to the table and you're good. You're good. You have no qualms. You're in it. You're healthy. And by healthy, I mean flourishing condition. And I love that phrase, flourishing condition. And we can interpret that as it will. But for me, I think that flourishing condition is just, it's a beautiful way to describe one's life and how one experiences life. Like, oh, I am in flourishing condition. That is what I mean. So imagine that. When one is in flourishing condition, how we relate with ourselves, with fellow humans, with other animals, with environment and place, and with whole community. It's radical self-care then becomes a constant negotiation, a way for us to check in and check out and pace ourselves in our relationships with ourselves in the moment. In our relationships with fellow humans, having the courage and the dignity and the strength to communicate openly as a real person, like just coming as your real self, and not feeling like you have to hide behind some persona or censor yourself, but just fiercely, in fierce compassion, just being open and being real. And then imagine then, as your real self, how you're relating with other animals. What are you receiving from them in the moment, whether it's in the flesh or through story, through the news, or whatever witnessing? What are you receiving receiving from them that's coming from them, and then what's coming from your ideas of them, and being able to notice the difference, and being able to have patience with yourself to get to become more connected and get to know where all of these diverse beings are coming from. And just being patient and kind with yourself as you do that as part of your work. Your relationships with environment and place, like how we relate to place and how we keep our environment, whether that's our vegan boutiques or our houses, and how we keep our houses and relate with our neighbors, and how we're in ecological relation with place. I mean, even that, at that scale, relating to that as a whole being can be profound in connecting with oneself and with fellow humans and other animals who are living in that place, like getting to know your non-human neighbors, one individual at a time. And in relationships with the whole community, like whole community, I mean interspecies community, ecological community, the ground you walk on, the community that you share meals with regularly, and just practicing how do we take all these pieces, all of these aspects of our lives, of our individual lives, and just navigate one step at a time through this monstrosity. I don't know if that's how I want to describe that, but how we navigate oppression and how we're able to still check in with ourselves, check in with our relations, and still manage to be whole and be grounded and be real and full of love. I mean, it sounds romantic, perhaps, when I express it that way, but I think it can, for me, and how and what I'm learning day by day with how I'm navigating in the world and how I'm empowering myself as an activist, I think treating this radical self-care like getting to the roots of who you are and what we need to survive and thrive and be in mutual, respectful, just, loving relations with other living beings is, I think, that it has to be a practice. It has to go by the day to day. And it helps to treat it as a practice, to treat it in the moment. How am I relating with myself today? How am I communicating with other people today? Am I just really getting frustrated? Am I being angry? Am I being accusatory? Am I getting frustrated with these people who just don't seem to get it? How am I relating with other animals? Who have I been interacting with in my life today? I mean, do I even know what's going on with the animals with whom I live in community? I mean, am I in check with just home base? And what is my relationship with environment and place right now? How am I relating to where I live, and how am I keeping that space? How am I walking in that space? What's my relationship with the whole community? Where do I feel anything? Am I connected? Do I feel the sun on my face? Am I in tune with all my relations? So those kinds of questions I like to help me to check in, to remember that all of this is life, and life matters, and I can't be a strong, empowered, helpful activist if I'm not in tune with life. And so I would like to, oh yes, and one final thing before I just say goodbye is I strongly encourage that we have this conversation more so around practice, around the importance of radical self-care at the individual and community level as a practice cultivating these life-affirming values, because it's not enough to recognize patterns of oppression but then have no tools or any grounding in life to make sense of it. So the practice, I think, will help us to respond to whatever we're facing in our world at that moment in a more life-affirming way. So I intentionally made my talk a little shorter because I didn't want to talk at everybody about this, because I think that this is a topic that's important for a community conversation. So if that's all right with you, Mike, could we open this up for talk?
Yeah, for sure. That was really terrific. Thank you.
Would you say that now that you have discovered radical self-care, your work as an activist has become emotionally easier? Was there a point when it was the hardest? And the second question is, do you think being active and informed in the first place is an act of radical self-care? So, I would say for the first question, if it has made my work emotionally easier, I would actually say yes, to an extent it has, only in the sense that I have just developed more resilience with time to know exactly what my hard work is in the moment and have the courage to kind of communicate that. It hasn't necessarily, like much of what I introduced in this talk were more aspirations than they were what's actually happening, especially at the community level. Like I haven't unfortunately been able to experience the power of radical self-care in an activist group, per se. So that hasn't gotten any easier. Because the activist group has still been kind of it's still been kind of a space of struggle and conflict without anyone meeting on real terms. So that's still been very tiring and challenging. And for your second question, do I think being active and informed in the first place is an act of radical self-care? Maybe. Well, informed in the sense that I'm able, just having the courage to be a witness to that violence, that kind of informed as an act of radical self-care. I would say that it's certainly an act of fierce compassion, which then informs radical self-care. But I wouldn't necessarily say that it is a full act of radical self-care, because radical self-care, I feel, is more process-oriented in that it kind of requires feedback of, I'm receiving this information from the world, and now radical self-care is that process of how I respond to that. Do I take a step back? Do I have the strength to even act at this point? And if I don't, then what is my hard work? What is the work that I need to do now in order to feel more comfortable or to feel more empowered to do something about these feelings? And I think by feelings, I mean, like if I wanted to take action, let's say, against wildlife trafficking, but it's so big and gigantic, and the images I see are always just nightmarish and awful and terrible, and I never get any good news about it. It's like it's so overwhelming, and if I don't feel like I'm in a place to respond to that from where I am right now, then perhaps that is not where my hard work is at this point. And so the act of radical self-care is then knowing, constantly evaluating, reevaluating, and knowing where my hard work is.